Hello friends, in today's class we are going to see CBSE class 10th geography first lesson, which is titled as resources and development. In this lesson we are going to look at what is a resource and how are we going to develop using planning techniques and conservation techniques. So in the first slide we are going to see what is a resource. So resource means which is used to satisfy our needs that can be technologically accessible, economically feasible and culturally acceptable. So we can classify the definition into three parts. That is, resource can be defined which can be used to satisfy our needs. That is, our wants can be satisfied by the means of a resource that should be technologically accessible and it should be economically feasible, which means I should be able to get by the means of money, that is whichever the currency that I have. And finally, it should be culturally acceptable, that is resources should be culturally accepted by people. So the combination of these three definitions, that is the combination of these three aspects, forms the completion of a resource. The next thing we are going to see is the classification of resources. So we are going to classify resources into two types. One is natural resources and another one is human resources. So in natural resources we have various classifications, that is renewable and non-renewable. In renewable there are two different classifications which can be continuous and biological in nature. Also in biological we have two different classification. One is natural vegetation and another one is wildlife. In non-renewable we have a recyclable resource and non-recyclable resource. So in natural there is non-renewable and renewable resource. In renewable we are classifying it as continuous and biological. In non-renewable, we are classifying it as recyclable and non-recyclable. So when we look at human resources, we classify them into two, based upon the structures and institutions and based upon the quantity and quality. In the upcoming slides, we will see a descriptive outlook to all the resources given in this particular slide. So, as first thing, we're going to see about natural resources. So, natural resources are those which are created by the nature. Of course, from the title itself, we are clear that it comes from the nature. Some of the example of natural resources are land, water, wildlife, atmosphere, etc. So when we look at resources, there are a lot of classification which can be made on the basis of exhaustibility, on the basis of origin and on the basis of ownership. This is very important, in which we are classifying the resources into three different parts. That is, on the basis of exhaustibility, how much can I take up the resource? So based upon that, the resources has been classified into renewable resource and non-renewable resource. And secondly, as a part of the classification, we are going to see the resources on the basis of origin. Origin is the birthplace of the resource. On the basis of origin, it can be classified into biotic resource and abiotic resource. On the basis of ownership, the resources have been classified into four parts, that is individual, community, national and international. In the upcoming slides, we will be clearly explaining what is an individual resource, what is a community resource, national and international resource. Firstly, we are going to see what is a renewable resource. Renewable means which can be renewed, which can be recycled. The word itself says that it can be extracted again and again. When we look at the definition of a renewable resource, it can be renewed or recycled, but it requires a process. We cannot simply extract a resource as such. We need process, that is, we need some experiment to take the resource out. That is, it can be by means of physical or chemical process. So the example of renewable resources: solar energy, wind energy, and forest around us. The second thing is about non-renewable resource. Non-renewable resource is the mere opposite of renewable resource. So renewable resource can be taken at the outset, like we can itself extract directly by the means of technical or physical process. But then non-renewable resources constrains a lot of time. It takes a lot of time. That is, it takes millions of years in their formation and cannot be renewed or reproduced. So as we do for renewable resources, the same technique cannot be applied for non-renewable resources because it requires time. Example, coal, petroleum, and natural gas take a lot of years, even million years, to take its form. Thirdly, we are going to see what is a biotic and abiotic resource. So biotic means it is directly related to our biosphere. It has life. Biotic means it has life, such as human beings, flora and fauna, fisheries, livestock, etc. Contrastingly, abiotic resources are composed of non-living things. To simply define a biotic and the abiotic resources, biotic has life and abiotic is related to non-living things. The example of abiotic resources includes rocks and metals. Thirdly, we are going to see what is an individual resource. The word itself says individual means it is owned by a single person. That is, the resource is owned by a particular individual. The ownership lies upon a person. The definition goes like this. Individual resources are those resources which are operated by an individual. The examples are land, pastures, ponds, water and wells, etc. Secondly, community-owned resources. So the opposite of individual is community. Community means a group of people. A group of people is taking care of the resources. The definition goes like this. Community resources are those resources which are managed by all the members of the community. As individual resource belongs to a single person, community-owned resources belongs to a group of people. That is, even public has the access to resources. For example, we could see grazing grounds, burial grounds around us, public parks, picnic spots, everything comes under community-owned resources. We as people join together to form a community and we have the complete authority over the resources. Next, we are going to see about national resources. First, we saw what is an individual resource and we saw what is a community resource. Now, we are going one step behind, that is national resources. National resources relates to a particular nation. For example, India has a lot of water resources, so it belongs to India. That is, it is related to a particular nation. In this slide, they have given an example of land resource, which is having a 12 nautical miles. That is, land resources are within the political boundaries and oceanic resources up to 12 nautical miles. A few examples are mentioned in this slide. Minerals, forest, wildlife, oceanic resources are the example of national resources. Finally, international resources. So as we all know that international means it is connected across various countries. That is, exchange of goods and services or resources between one country to another country. The definition goes like this. International resources are those resources which are managed by international institutions. It does not belong to one particular nation. It belongs to various nations of the world. For example, the petroleum that we use, the oceanic resources are the example of international resources. So next we are going to see the resources on the basis of status of development. So in the previous slides we saw the classification of resources on the basis of three. Now we are going to see on the basis of status of development, like how are we going to develop those resources that we have. Okay. So potential resources, in the upcoming slides we'll be seeing what is a potential resource, what is the reserved resource and developed resource. So look at the examples that they have mentioned in this slide for further use. First thing, potential resources. So potential, the word potential means it has some ability, but then due to lack of technology the resources are of no use. So potential resources are those resources whose quality and quantity is unknown because of lack of technology. So we are not taking any steps to make use of the resources which are potential in nature. We exactly don't know what is the quality or quantity of that particular resource. Whereas stock resources, they have the potential to satisfy the human needs, but then we don't have the appropriate technology. For example, if a person is able to study, or if a student has the ability to study but he has no proper technology to get education, it means that it is a stock resource. Even though we have that resource, we don't have a particular technology to access such kind of a resource. So now let's question, how are we going to develop these resources? Of course, if you are not going to develop resources, then it is of no use. So we have to develop resources. So let's look at how to develop our resources. The definition of developing resources is, it is the process of developing the resources in order to make them useful for satisfying human wants. So anything which satisfies human wants is called as a resource. So but then some resources cannot be used directly. It needs some process, it needs some experimentation to satisfy our demand. For example, land has to be cleared and plowed for growing crops. For example, if I want to grow crops, I cannot immediately go and plow or do something. It needs some time to make the land properly set up, and then only I have to carry out all the techniques involved. That is, water has to be taken to the field to irrigate. So I cannot simply say that water is available in my field, I am going to irrigate it. I need to provide pipelines to it. I need to make some process and then execute it accordingly. So next thing we are going to see, what are the problems that we as human beings create. Okay, so of course we human beings, due to the development of technology, create a lot of problem to our environment. Now we are going to see what is the impact as human beings we are creating to the resources. So many resources got depleted. Example, the best example is forest. We are taking many minerals out of it, and we are also using plastic. So because of that, many resources are getting depleted day by day. And due to the ownership also, the resources got accumulated in the hands of few people. Due to the discrimination of poor and rich, like the lands are being distributed uneven, and the resources are getting accumulated in the hands of a few people. That is, only few people has the access to it. So as a result of this, global warming, environmental degradation and ozone layer depletion are the major problems occurring day to day. So next we're going to see what is the sustainable economic development. In the previous slide we saw what are the problems created by us, and we're going to see how are we going to conserve these resources for a future generation. Sustainable economic development relates to the future generation. To be simple, sustainability means it is taking care of the needs of future generation. Why sustainable development is important? Why is it necessary? Because many resources has been exploited already. So in order to conserve those resources, in consideration to our future generation, we are going to conserve the resources. Keeping in mind that we are going to preserve all the resources that we have today. And also environmental pollution such as air pollution, water pollution, noise pollution has become a major threat to the survival of human beings. So what is the solution? So when we look at these problems, we may be afraid, how are we going to sort out this? But then we have resource planning as the supreme solution to overcome. Resource planning is a technique or a skill of proper utilization of resources. So everything in our day-to-day life requires planning. For example, if a student is not going to prepare for his or her exams, then definitely he or she is not going to present properly because there is no proper planning or preparation by the student. Same as like that, resources should be properly planned. We have 3 different stages involved in it. First thing is we have to identify where the resource is and we have to plan accordingly. And thirdly, we have to match whether our resource is connected to the national development plans or not. To be simple, first is to identify, second is to plan, and third is to match. Let's see what is the importance of resource planning. We saw what is a resource planning. Now we are going to see what is the importance of resource planning. For having a balanced development, we need planning. That is, we may not say that India has rich resources equally distributed to all the parts of the country. Some regions of India has rich resources, but then some are poor in nature. Example, Rajasthan has poor water resources, but it has rich solar and wind energy. So some regions, they have self-sufficient resources, like Madhya Pradesh has a lot of resources in its electricity, or but then Ladakh has a poor in resources. So there may be variations like this. So when we do proper planning and we execute things properly, wastage of resources can be prevented. And also at the same time, we can also reduce environmental pollution. Over exploitation of resources also can be avoided. For example, if I am going to take out the production from 1 hectare of land continuously for 2 to 3 years, then the productivity of the land will go low. So I as a farmer need to leave few gap, that is I have to give some time interval to get proper production, that is to get proper output. Same as like that, over exploitation of resources can be avoided when there is a time limit. Next, we are going to see what is resource conservation. Conservation is different from sustainable development. Here, we have already planned like how are we going to execute our resources in a proper manner. Now, we are going to consider how the future generation is going to get benefited out of it. That is why they have given a definition like this. Planned use of resources in order to meet the present needs and to store a part for the future generation. Okay. Let's understand what is resource conservation through an example. For example, if a father is earning 5,000 rupees as income, as a monthly income, he will save 3,000 for the present and then he will leave 2,000 into his bank. That is for the future. It may be for the educational purpose or some financial needs. So because he is working for the present and as well as the future. So same as like that, resource conservation is able to meet the present needs and to store a part for the future generation. Why it is necessary? Because many resources are non-renewable and exhaustible. Like if we conserve them, we can use them for a longer period of time. If you are not going to conserve it, then we can only use them for the present and it is not going to help for the future. So benefits of resource conservation helps us to reduce the wastage. Also by the means we are going to help the nation in building its economic progress. Lastly, resource conservation is directly connected to protecting our environment. It helps us to protect our environment.